Hello and welcome. My name is Victor Gijsbers. I teach philosophy at Leiden University in the Netherlands. In this video I want to talk about the 1985 article or chapter. It's based on an article but rewritten, so it's, I suppose, essentially a chapter from Annette Baier's book Postures of the Mind. And the chapter is called Doing Without Moral Theory ? Doing without moral theory ? Though the answer is going to be, yeah, let's do without moral theory. Which might be surprising, because Annette Baier is, among other things, an ethicist. Right? She's doing ethics, so you might expect her to be doing moral theory. But the whole point of her essay is to argue that, well, there are other ways of doing ethical philosophy, moral philosophy, than just giving what she is going to call a moral theory, and those other ways of doing moral philosophy are better, and we should be spending more of our time doing that and less of our time constructing these moral theories. So, how does the story work? She starts out by contrasting, on the one hand, Aristotle and Hume with, on the other hand, contemporary moral philosophers. And she tells us that there are two important differences between Aristotle and Hume on the one hand, contemporary moral philosophers on the other hand. One difference, the first, though maybe the least crucial of the two for the purposes of the article, but the first difference is that neither Aristotle nor Hume, nor for that matter, I suppose, most of the moral philosophers that come between them, anticipate much disagreement about moral judgments. Right? So Aristotle doesn't really believe that his audience is going to have very different moral judgment from he himself. Right? I mean, they all think that courage in war is a good thing, and they think that helping your friends is a good thing, and they think that self-control and not drinking too much is a good thing, and so on and so forth. I mean, they're basically supposed to be in agreement about that. And the same is true for Hume. Hume also seems to think that, everybody agrees that helping the poor is a good thing and stealing their money is a bad thing, and so on and so forth. So they're not really worried very much about moral disagreement, because they don't think there is a lot of moral disagreement, certainly not about the people that they are writing for. And that changes. Right now, moral philosophers, in fact, do seem to anticipate a lot of moral disagreement, and they think that, oh wow, there's all these topics, like maybe, are you allowed to eat meat? Is abortion okay? Should we wage wars? And so on and so on. I mean, there's all these topics about which there are massive moral disagreements. So, when does that change? Well, according to Baier, the change comes more or less with the 19th century utilitarian philosophers Bentham and Mill, both of whom seem to see themselves not just as moral philosophers, but also as moral reformers. Right? They think that their theories have certain implications that go against what most people sort of believe about morality, and so their theories are not just theories that sort of systemize what we already believe. They are actually calls to change the way that we do ethics, the way that we think about morality, the way that we live. So Bentham and Mill are moral reformers. They're out there to make a point, to change the world. So moral theory, it's going to involve disagreement, because the theory itself in Bentham and Mill is going to go against sort of commonly held moral beliefs, and so giving the moral theory and calling for reform are for Bentham and Mill sort of, they logically belong together. Now, Baier says, most, not all, but most contemporary moral philosophers agree with Bentham and Mill that there's all these moral disagreements, and that if they come up with a moral theory, it's going to have a lot of implications that people are not going to agree with, or that some people are going to agree with, but others are not. But very few of them want to be moral reformers. In fact, most of them take up a sort of neutrality. They say, oh, I'm just sort of in my sort of academic position thinking about how to systematize our moral judgments, where our sort of can be pragmatically made smaller such that the disagreements fall overboard. And you can say something like, well, I am trying to systematize the moral beliefs of people who more or less agree with me, of people who I can describe in this and this way, such that all those people that disagree with me sort of fall out of the boat. So there's a kind of, on the one hand, a sort of neutrality, or on the other hand, a sort of like choosing a very small or isolated group even and saying, oh, well, my moral theory is just a systematization of what I believe and what people who think like me believe. And that's what I'm doing when I'm doing moral theory. And it doesn't seem to be much of an impetus to sort of change people's mind or change society, or a belief that that's what the moral theory is for. And Baier tells us that although she likes Mill, she likes these sort of moral crusades, these moral reforms, she has respect for that this sort of more modern, more contemporary way of doing it, where you have a theory, you know that people will disagree with the consequences, but you sort of don't see that as a call to action or reform. She doesn't like that at all, and she calls it, and I quote, ideology parading as detachment. So you've got your sort of own ideology, but instead of being honest about it, you present yourself as this very detached academic thinker who is not going to enter the fray of actual moral and political argument out there in society. So she doesn't like that. She doesn't think that as moral philosophers, that is what our stance should be. And we're going to see how to change that stance later on. But first, let's think about the second difference between Aristotle and Hume on the one hand, and these contemporary moral philosophers on the other hand. And here Baier tells us that Aristotle and Hume do not have normative theories. They do not have normative theories. Well, what does she mean by that? They're both well known for their ethics, right? Well, a normative theory for Baier is a systematic sort of story in which the less general is derived from the more general. So a classic example might be Kant, right? You've got the categorical imperative, that's a very general statement, and then you get your particular moral judgments out of that. Or classic utilitarianism. You got your story about sort of maximizing happiness, that's the general maxim, and then any particular maxim is supposed to follow from that. And there's nothing like that in Aristotle or Hume. She says when Aristotle and Hume are doing ethics, they sort of are almost all the time at this level of sort of the details. That's certainly where they start, and that's where they actually do most of their moral thinking. They do not have these overarching abstract theories that are supposed to rule the individual cases and that are supposed to give us these recipes for always doing the right thing in every circumstance. So, what she wants to do in the rest of the article, she says, is attack this idea of moral theory. She wants to claim that we don't need it, that we shouldn't want it, and especially, the worst of all, having these big overall moral theories and not even using them to go out in society and try to reform something. So, what's going on? Why do we think we need a theory? Well, Baier says, in science, sometimes you have a theory, right, which tells you how to understand the particular cases. But there's also loads of disciplines in which we don't have theories. For instance, cooking. I suppose a cook might have certain sort of theoretical ideas about nutrition or whatever. But if you think about what it is to make good recipes, to make good food, and so on and so forth, nobody has really tried to give us a systematic theory, the theory of good food, from which then the particular recipes are going to follow, right? And so if you have the theory of good cooking, then you can show that, oh yeah, in this recipe you should put that much salt and that much pepper and that much fat or whatever. That doesn't exist. Nobody thinks it is possible. So why would we think that it's possible in the realm of ethics, right? Or that we even need it? What's the point? And then Baier has a brief aside where she says, well, back when, if you really think that our ethical thinking comes from God, that it sort of reflects a moral order that God has created, then maybe you can think of ethics as something like like science, as something like physics, except instead of God's natural order, we are now looking at God's normative order. But in anything like a secular way of thinking about ethics, this doesn't even seem plausible, right? I mean, why would we think that there is such an order, that it is neatly sort of systematized, and that we can find it through one of these abstract moral theories? Well, maybe we think that because we make an analogy with law. And in fact, people like to talk about the moral law. Like Kant loves to talk about the moral law, but also other philosophers like to talk about the moral law. And when you think about laws, I mean, they do have, when we try to systematize our customs, when we make up laws, I mean, we have to sort of make these systems that are applicable in practice, but also very general, and we can write them down in our law books, and so on and so forth. But the idea that you can always do this, or that you could do this in ethics, is for Baier a mere Kantian prejudice. And this prejudice sort of has three parts. It's a prejudice that our knowledge of morality has to be explicit, right? That we have to be able to frame it as sort of a theory. It's a prejudice that our knowledge of morality has to be universal, that it has to be sort of claims that are always and everywhere sort of true, so that the particular comes out of the general. And it is a prejudice that it has to have some kind of coercive backing. That, to take Kant again as an example, if you don't follow the moral law, you are like failing to be rational, or sort of like going against your own very nature. I mean, that sounds sort of coercive. There's something there. If you don't do it, I mean, you're in some kind of trouble. And of course, there are other stories that you could tell there. But this is sort of the Kantian prejudice that Baier thinks is still operative in almost all our moral philosophy. It's the idea that we need a moral theory that is explicit, right? You can write it down. That is universal, like it's fully general, and the particular cases fall out of it. And it's coercive. I mean, you have to follow it. There's no way around it. There's no. I mean, it's just there. It is completely unconditional. Instead, she says, what sort of any moral knowledge that we can impart to others, for instance, or that we can act upon ourselves, has to be, it has to be learnable, right? I mean, you've got to be able to learn it, to teach it to your children, for instance, but that doesn't mean it have to be explicit. Like, it doesn't have to take the form of a theory, because you can teach by example, right? You can teach people to be courageous and kind and so on by example, without an explicit theory about what it is to do the good thing. Such a theory needs to be general. I mean, if I show you courage by example, then that example should be like inspiring and useful to you in other circumstances, not just this one case where I showed it to you. But general is not the same thing as universal, right? It doesn't have to be something that's always the case. It doesn't have to be something where, like, the universal, the fully general, is the primary thing, and all the particular cases follow from that. So it's got to be a little bit general. It's got to generalize beyond this one particular situation, but it doesn't have to have this claim to universality. And yeah, I mean, morality also has to give us some motive for following it. But again, that motive doesn't have to be like this unconditional, you have to follow it because this is the moral law that we know from Kantian ethics, but also maybe from ethical thinking in general. So, we do want moral thinking, and it needs to be learnable, it needs to be general, generalizable, it needs to motivate, but it doesn't have to be explicit, like you can write it down as a universal law that is an unconditional obligation on you. So that's Baier's sort of attempt to show what is, in a sense, right about thinking in terms of moral theory, but also wrong, because this idea of moral theory is much too strong. I mean, that's not what we need. We can do with something much more down to earth. And so she tells us that what she's arguing against is the law-fixated rationalist tradition. And instead, she says, we should get inspired by Hume. Why? Well, look, what Hume is doing is he is setting up a system of ethics that's not rationalist. You're not supposed to sort of get the truths from your armchair. And it has a very strong relation with actual practices. There's lots of empirical stuff in it. Hume spends a lot of time talking about psychology, about history, maybe sociology, economics. I mean, we need to think about how people actually function, what they feel, how their emotions work, how society works, what we've seen in history. We need to get the nitty-gritty, earthy details of life if we want to make any serious pronouncements of about what you ought to do in certain circumstances. And we need to work that out and try maybe different things. We, as philosophers, of course, want to think. We want to develop concepts, ideas, ways to describe these situations. We want to try to draw lessons from all these psychological, historical, social, economic facts, from the things that we've seen. But that could take the form not of some overall generalizing theory, but lots of local stories, local ideas that are to a certain extent general, but not universal, that are maybe sometimes explicit, but could also just take the form of examples, and which we could approach in a very experimental fashion, right? I mean, we want to try out different moral ideas, see whether they work. Like, if you teach people this way, are they actually going to lead happier lives or not? And so on and so forth. So, it's a programmatic call to arms to try to approach ethics in a different way, to do moral philosophy in a different way. Don't get the theory, but get down to earth. Get there in society. Talk to all these other scientists, social scientists, people in the humanities. Get in these sort of practical situations where people actually need moral advice, where we can see what happens if we try out different things. So, I'll read the final paragraph of the article. Such moral philosophy would merge with other disciplines and with the reflections of common life, and such a merger might help us to escape from that arrogance of solitary intellect which has condemned much moral theory to sustained self-delusions concerning its subject matter, its methods, and its authority. So basically she's saying, all that moral philosophy that we're doing, that gives you like this new form of utilitarianism or this new story about the Kantian moral law or whatever, it's self-delusional. But it doesn't have the authority it thinks it has. It's not really applicable. Nobody's going to do anything with it. The only thing it's good for, and she almost literally says this, is to get some philosophy professors to have a nice salary. Of course, her alternative story would have to be shown to work in practice, but as a methodological call to arms, I think it's a very nice, intriguing article that certainly sets out a different way of thinking about ethics, doing ethics, and I'm eager to read some more Annette Baier and see what she does with it. Thank you for listening.